In a country where the government controls the narrative and censors uncomfortable truths, some crimes are simply too shocking to hide. What you're about to hear are 3 stories of women whose crimes rocked China to its core, cases so disturbing that even a nation of over 1 billion people couldn't look away. From the wife of one of China's most powerful politicians who poisoned a British businessman and nearly toppled the government, to a former schoolteacher who became one of the country's most wanted serial killers and evaded capture for 20 years, to a trusted doctor who told parents their babies had died while secretly selling them for profit, these women shattered every expectation of who a killer could be. One of these cases exposed corruption at the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party and became an international scandal. Another involved murders so brutal that the details were kept from the public for decades. And the third revealed a trafficking network that destroyed countless families and changed Chinese law forever. Before we dive into these shocking true stories, let me know in the comments what time you're watching this and where you're watching from. Now, let's meet the first woman on our list, a lawyer, a political wife, and a cold-blooded killer. Case 1. Gu Kailai. Gu Kailai was born on the 15th of November 1958 into a life of privilege and power that most Chinese citizens could only dream about. Her father was a prominent general in the Communist Party, which meant Gu grew up surrounded by China's political elite, the people who controlled the country's destiny. She was highly educated, studying law and becoming a successful lawyer in her own right. But her real claim to power came when she married Bo Xilai, a rising political star who would eventually become the party chief of Chongqing, one of China's most important cities. Together, they formed one of the most powerful couples in the country. They lived a lavish lifestyle that included international business connections, expensive properties, and sending their son Bo Guagua to some of the world's most prestigious schools, Harrow in England, Oxford University, and Harvard in the United States. To the outside world, Gu Kailai appeared to have the perfect life, wealth, status, influence, everything anyone could want. But behind the scenes, things were far darker. Gu was deeply involved in corruption and money laundering schemes, using her husband's political connections to make shady business deals and move illegal money around the world. She was protected by her husband's immense power, which meant she operated above the law for years. But Gu lived in constant fear that someone would expose these secrets and destroy everything she had built. That fear would eventually drive her to commit murder. Neil Heywood was a 41-year-old British businessman who had met the Gu family in the early 2000s in the coastal city of Dalian. What started as a business relationship quickly evolved into something much closer. Heywood became a trusted family friend and confidant. He helped Bo Guagua gain admission to elite British schools, using his connections and knowledge of the British education system. But Heywood's real value to the family was as a fixer and middleman in their various business ventures. He was intimately involved in helping Gu move money overseas, setting up offshore accounts, and facilitating deals that allowed the family to hide their wealth from Chinese authorities. Heywood knew every intimate detail of the family's finances, which made him invaluable but also incredibly dangerous. As time went on, the relationship between Heywood and Gu began to deteriorate. There were disputes over money, with Heywood allegedly demanding a larger cut of the profits from their various schemes. More worryingly for Gu, Heywood began making threats about exposing the corruption if he didn't get what he wanted. Gu became increasingly paranoid that Heywood would reveal their illegal dealings to authorities, which would not only destroy her husband's political career, but could also put their son in danger. What had once been a relationship built on trust and mutual benefit had transformed into something toxic and frightening. Heywood probably didn't realize just how dangerous his position had become. Still trusting that their long friendship would protect him, he was tragically wrong. On the night of the 13th of November 2011, in the sprawling city of Chongqing, Neil Heywood received an invitation to meet Gu Kailai at the Lucky Holiday Hotel. Specifically, they would meet in room 1605 at the Nanshan Lijing Holiday Hotel. Gu had arranged this meeting under completely false pretenses, telling Heywood they needed to discuss some business matters. Heywood had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. He'd met with Gu countless times before. What he didn't know was that Gu had brought along her aide, Zhang Shuxia, to help carry out what she had planned. During their evening meeting in the hotel room, Heywood began drinking and eventually became quite drunk. When he started feeling ill and asked for water, Gu and Zhang gave him a drink, but this wasn't ordinary water. It was laced with a cyanide compound. Heywood quickly began vomiting and became incapacitated as the poison took effect. To ensure he died, Gu actually poured more poison directly down his throat while he was helpless. Heywood died there in that hotel room, far from home and betrayed by someone he had considered a friend. His body was discovered the next morning, but here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The local police, who were under the control of Bo Xilai's political machine, initially ruled Heywood's death as alcohol poisoning, calling it natural causes. The case was covered up for months, protected by Bo Xilai's immense political power. Heywood's body was cremated quickly, without a proper autopsy that might have revealed the truth. The British Embassy raised concerns about the circumstances of his death, but their questions went nowhere. It seemed like the perfect crime until it wasn't. Wang Lijun.
Neil Heywood was a British businessman who had lived in and out of China for around 20 years, and he was found dead in a hotel room in the central Chinese city of Chongqing in November of last year. Now, he was initially cremated quite quickly. There was no autopsy, and his family were told that he died of natural causes. A few months later, things turned upside down when a former police chief of Chongqing province went to a US consulate in neighboring Chengdu and claimed that he had evidence which suggested that Neil Heywood had in fact been murdered, and that the person responsible was a woman called Kailai. Now, Gu Kailai, is married to one of the most famous politicians in China, a man called Bo Xilai. He was the head of the Communist Party in Chongqing, and he'd been tipped for great things. He wanted to get a position in the top 10 of Chinese politicians when it comes round to a huge once-a-decade leadership transition coming up here in China in the autumn. Well, he has since been dismissed from his position and he's being investigated for party indiscretions. His case is ongoing, but the case against Gu Kailai has come to court today here in Hefei, and she has gone on trial accused of murdering Neil Heywood along with one of her domestic staff, Zhang Shuxia. What's interesting here, though, is that this is something which people are suggesting will last for perhaps just one day. There doesn't seem to be any real exploration of the facts and the evidence in this case. And in fact, we've been talking to lawyers who are closely connected with this case, and they have been telling us that the legal representatives, the family wanted to represent these two defendants in court, haven't actually been allowed to even see them, and that lawyers appointed by the state have been wheeled in their place. So there is some sense that the defendants will not get the trial that perhaps they had hoped for.
Chongqing's police chief had secretly begun investigating the case and discovered evidence that pointed to murder rather than natural causes. In February 2012, fearing for his own safety, Wang did something extraordinary. He fled to the United States consulate, creating an international incident that the Chinese government could no longer ignore. The central government was forced to investigate what had really happened. Slowly, the truth began to emerge, and what started as a covered-up murder exploded into one of the biggest political scandals in modern Chinese history. Gu Kailai was arrested in April 2012 and charged with intentional homicide. Her trial took place on the 9th of August 2012 in the city of Hefei, notably not in Chongqing, where her husband still held influence. The trial lasted only one day and was heavily controlled by the government, with extremely limited media access. During the proceedings, Gu admitted to poisoning Heywood, but claimed she had been suffering from temporary insanity at the time. She argued that she was protecting her son from threats and that her mental state had deteriorated due to extreme stress. Her defense team pushed the narrative of diminished capacity, suggesting she wasn't fully responsible for her actions. On the 20th of August 2012, the verdict came down. Gu was convicted of intentional homicide and sentenced to death, but with a 2-year reprieve. This suspended sentence was granted due to her cooperation with authorities. By December 2012, her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Interestingly, Her sentence was reduced again in December 2015, though she remains imprisoned to this day. The location where she's being held is kept secret by Chinese authorities. Her husband, Bo Xilai, was separately convicted of corruption charges and sentenced to life in prison in his own trial. Both remain behind bars, their once glorious political careers destroyed by greed, corruption, and murder. The reaction throughout China was one of absolute shock. The case provided a rare glimpse into the corruption that exists at the highest levels of the Communist Party elite, a world that ordinary Chinese citizens never see. International media went into a frenzy, with news outlets around the world covering every development in the scandal. The British government demanded justice for their citizen, putting diplomatic pressure on China. Heywood's family was devastated, having lost a loved one and then watching as the truth about his death was slowly revealed through what became a very public scandal. Bo Xilai's downfall was historic. He had been considered a potential future leader of China, possibly even destined for the Politburo Standing Committee, the country's highest ruling body. Instead, his political career ended in disgrace, and he became a symbol of elite corruption. The case exposed corruption at the very highest levels of Chinese government and deeply embarrassed party leaders. Domestically within China, the case was heavily censored, with social media discussions carefully monitored and controlled by government censors who didn't want the public dwelling too long on what the scandal revealed about their leaders. The Kailai case remains one of the most significant political scandals in modern Chinese history, a reminder that even the most powerful people can fall when their crimes finally catch up with them. Case 2. Lao Rongzhi. Lao Rongzhi was born on the 25th of December 1974 in Zhujiang, Jiangxi province, into what appeared to be a completely ordinary family. There was nothing in her early life that would suggest she would become one of China's most notorious serial killers. In fact, Lao was a primary school teacher, someone trusted to educate and care for young children. She was described by those who knew her as beautiful and charming, with an innocent, sweet appearance that made people naturally trust her. She was well educated, well-spoken, and had no criminal history whatsoever in her early years. Her life took a dark turn in 1993 when she met a man named Fa Ziying at a friend's wedding. Fei was a known criminal and gangster, the complete opposite of what you'd expect a schoolteacher to be involved with. But Lao fell into a toxic, violent relationship with him that would transform her from an elementary school teacher into an accomplice to murder. She became a willing participant in horrific crimes, using her attractive appearance and innocent demeanor as weapons to lure unsuspecting victims. Lao worked as a hostess and escort at KTV clubs as a cover for her criminal activities, and she became skilled at using multiple fake identities to avoid detection. She was a master of deception and manipulation, able to make people trust her completely before leading them into deadly traps. Throughout all the horror she helped create, Lao showed absolutely no remorse for any of her victims. Between 1996 and 1999, Lao Rongzhi and Fa Ziying terrorized multiple provinces across China, leaving 7 people dead in their wake.
Right, let's now shift our focus to China. A notorious serial killer has been executed. Her name was Lao Rongzhi. Let me put a face on it. This is what she looked like. She used to be a primary school teacher. Yes, a school teacher. Imagine the number of kids who were exposed to this criminal. Fortunately, nothing bad happened at that time. In 1993, she met her boyfriend, Fa Ziying. In 1996, the trouble began. Lao's crimes began to surface. For 3 years, she committed murders, abductions, and robberies. Fa Ziying, her boyfriend, was her partner in crime. They did their dirty work in southeast China, mainly in the cities of Nanchang, Wenzhou, Shangzhou, and Hefei. Lao worked as a hostess in entertainment venues. Her job was to look for targets. She would spot rich people. Fa would commit the violence. First, they kidnapped individuals to extort money. How much? More than 100,000 yuan or $14,000. They also threatened to acquire their property. Eventually, the couple turned to murdering people. They killed 7 in total. Lao was directly involved in killing 5 of them. In one case, the duo murdered a couple and their 3-year-old child. Yes, they didn't even spare a child. First, they killed the family. Then, Lao mutilated the body of the male victim. Then the two went on to rob their home. The couple was on the police's radar. In 1999, the authorities finally got a hold of them. Fa was out collecting ransom. He thought his victim had gone to collect cash. But in reality, she had gone to call the cops. Fa was caught red-handed, but he helped Lao evade by lying to the cops. He was executed later that year. Lao was still on the run. For 2 decades, she managed to elude Chinese authorities. She adopted various aliases, worked odd jobs, lay low, and fooled the police, all until 2019. She was working at a mall in Xiamen, selling watches. That's when a police database helped identify her as a fugitive that they had been seeking for 20 years. She was charged with murder, kidnapping, and robbery. In 2020, Lao was hauled before the court. When her trial began, she apologized to the families of the victims with tears in her eyes. She also offered money as compensation, even though she didn't have much in her bank account. She claimed that she didn't mean to hurt anyone, that in truth, she was trapped in an abusive relationship with Fa Ziying, her boyfriend, who forced her into these crimes. You see, Lao decided to play the victim card. She further claimed that she had 4 abortions while she was with Fa and was battered by him. She alleges that her boyfriend would beat her up, choke her, torture her. When she talked of breaking up, he threatened to kill her family. She says, and I quote, "I didn't want to kill anyone, I just wanted to live." Now, we don't know how much of this can be believed, so take it all with a pinch of salt. This is a cold-blooded serial killer we are talking about. She had murdered, mutilated, and committed heinous crimes. She had destroyed families. Reports say that one of the victims had 3 very bright children, but none of them could finish schooling because of the trauma. In 2021, Lao was handed the death penalty by an intermediate court. In 2022, the sentence was upheld by the High Court. Once the top court approved the decision, Lao was finally executed. It took the police 20 long years to get a hold of her. The Chinese media is now reporting that justice has been served.
Their victims included men, women, and even a small child. No one was safe from this deadly pair. The first victims were a businessman named Zhang Shuxia and his girlfriend, killed in Nanchang in 1996. Xiong had money, which made him a target. Lao befriended him, and he was taken hostage and held for ransom. Even after the ransom was paid, both Xiong and his girlfriend were murdered. Their second case involved 2 women named Liang Xiaochun and Liu Suqing in Wenzhou in 1997. Both worked at a KTV club alongside Lao, and they considered her a friend and colleague. They trusted her completely, never suspecting that she was setting them up to be robbed and killed. Perhaps the most horrific case involved a carpenter named Lu Zongming in Hefei in 1999. Lao convinced him to come to her apartment to fix a window, a simple handyman job that seemed completely innocent. But Lu wasn't the actual target. He was murdered in the most brutal way imaginable, stabbed 20 times, and then beheaded with an axe simply to intimidate another hostage and prove that Lao and Fa were serious about killing. The final case involved the Yin Zhenhua family, also in Hefei in 1999. This family included a 3-year-old daughter. The entire family was held hostage, and everyone except Yin's wife was eventually murdered, including that innocent child. The wife survived to tell the horrifying story of what had happened. Between 1996 and 1999, Lao and Fa went on a crime spree that would shock the nation once it was finally exposed. Lao's specific role was to identify and lure victims. She used her beauty and charm as weapons, making people trust her before leading them into deadly situations. She typically worked at entertainment venues like KTV clubs, where she could identify wealthy targets who had money worth stealing. Once she had selected a victim, Fa Ziying would commit the actual violence. But make no mistake, Lao was an active and willing participant in every crime. Their pattern was consistent: kidnap someone, demand ransom from their family, and then murder the victim even after the money was paid. The first case in July 1996 targeted businessman Xiong Qi in Nanchang. Lao befriended him at a karaoke club, making him feel comfortable and safe. She then lured him to an apartment where Fa took him hostage at knife point. Xiong was locked in a makeshift cage like an animal while ransom demands were sent to his family. After the payment was received, both Xiong and his girlfriend were killed anyway. But the most disturbing case was the Hefei carpenter incident. Lu Zhongming was called to their apartment to fix a window, a completely innocent request for a simple repair job. Once inside, Fa stabbed this innocent man 20 times before beheading him with an axe. His body was stored in their freezer, and his severed head was shown to another hostage they were holding to prove they weren't bluffing about killing people. A 3-year-old girl witnessed these horrors before she too was eventually killed. In total, 7 people were murdered and over 100,000 yuan was stolen. After each crime, the couple would flee to a different province, constantly moving and using fake identities to stay ahead of authorities. They lived in the shadows for years. Fa Ziying was finally arrested on the 23rd of July 1999 and was executed just months later on the 28th of December 1999. But Lao escaped. She simply vanished, living under fake names and working in different cities across China. For 20 years, she remained free, while the families of her victims wondered if she would ever face justice. Finally, in November 2019, she was caught in the city of Xiamen. Lao Rongzhi was arrested on the 28th of November 2019 after 2 decades on the run. Her trial took place in December 2020 in Nanchang, where she was charged with intentional homicide, robbery, and kidnapping. During the trial, Lao claimed that she was a victim too, that Fa had coerced her through physical and emotional abuse, and that all the violence had been his doing, not hers. She tried to paint herself as someone who had been forced into these crimes against her will, but the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of her active participation. Witness testimonies were damning, particularly from survivor Liu Min, who had watched Lao work alongside Fa in the crimes. On the 9th of September 2021, the Nanchang Intermediate Court found her guilty on all charges and sentenced her to death. Lao immediately appealed the sentence, but in August 2022, the Jiangxi High Court upheld the death sentence after hearing her appeal. In November 2022, the Supreme Court of China reviewed the case one final time and confirmed that the death sentence would stand. On the 18th of December 2023, Lao Rongzhi was executed by lethal injection. She offered no final statement of remorse, showing to the very end the same lack of empathy she had displayed throughout her crimes. Justice had finally been served, 24 years after her crime spree had begun. The nation was shocked by the revelation that someone had evaded capture for 20 years while living seemingly normal lives in plain sight. The case became a media sensation, with people across China following every development. Public opinion was deeply divided on Lao's level of culpability. Some people believed her claims that she had been coerced and abused by Fa, viewing her as someone who had fallen under the control of a violent man. Others saw her as an equal participant who had used her feminine appearance to lure victims to their deaths, making her just as guilty as Fa. The victims' families had sought justice for decades, never giving up hope that Lao would one day be caught and punished. The case of the 3-year-old victim was particularly heartbreaking for the Chinese public. The case also sparked important debates about violence against women and domestic coercion, but also about women as perpetrators of violence, challenging stereotypes about gender and crime. When Lao was finally executed in 2023, it brought a sense of closure to families who had waited nearly a quarter-century for justice. Case 3. Zhang Shuxia. Zhang Shuxia worked as an obstetrician at Fuping County Hospital in Shaanxi Province, a region in northwest China characterized by rural poverty and limited resources. She held a position of tremendous trust and authority. She was responsible for delivering babies and ensuring the safety of both mothers and their newborn infants. In any society, doctors who work in maternity wards are seen as protectors of the most vulnerable, people who dedicate their lives to bringing new life safely into the world. But Zhang Shuxia was the opposite of what a doctor should be. Instead of protecting the vulnerable families who came to her hospital, she systematically exploited them for profit. The rural hospital where she worked had poor oversight and minimal supervision, which gave Zhang the perfect opportunity to carry out her crimes without being caught. She was driven purely by greed, with absolutely no regard for the suffering she caused to the families whose babies she stole. Zhang deliberately targeted poor, rural families, people she knew couldn't fight back against someone in a position of authority. She used her medical position to deceive parents, telling them elaborate lies about their babies' conditions. She would declare perfectly healthy babies dead or claim they had severe birth defects, then sell those infants to human trafficking networks for profit. She was part of a larger baby trafficking operation that connected her to illegal adoption rings throughout China. For each baby she sold, Zhang made thousands of yuan, profiting from the grief and desperation of families who trusted her. Zhang's victims were multiple newborn babies, and their families. At least 7 cases were confirmed by investigators, though the true number is likely much higher since many cases probably went unreported. The parents who came to Zhang's hospital were poor, rural farmers from some of China's most impoverished areas. They came to the hospital for what should have been one of the happiest moments of their lives, the birth of a child. They trusted Zhang completely because she was a medical professional, someone with education and authority. These parents were vulnerable and naive about the healthcare system, which made them perfect targets for Zhang's exploitation. Zhang particularly targeted unwed mothers who she knew would face social stigma and would be less likely to push back against her authority. She also focused on families with obvious financial problems, people who were desperate and afraid. When these families gave birth, Zhang would tell the parents that their babies had died during or immediately after birth, or she would claim the infants had severe birth defects that made survival impossible. Parents were absolutely devastated by these deaths, mourning children they believed they had lost. Some mothers never even got to see their babies. Zhang would claim the infants were too sick or that it was better for the parents not to see them. Zhang created fake death certificates and forged medical records to make everything appear legitimate. Meanwhile, those supposedly dead babies were actually alive and healthy. Zhang would hand them over to human traffickers who would sell them to families looking to adopt. Each baby sold for between 20,000 and 50,000 yuan, a fortune for someone in Zhang's position. The families whose babies were stolen spent years grieving children they thought were dead, never knowing their babies were actually alive and living somewhere in China. Zhang Shuxia's crimes occurred over several years, but the most prominent case that finally exposed her operation happened in July 2013. This case involved a baby boy born to a rural couple who had come to Fuping Hospital for the delivery. Zhang herself delivered the baby, and by all accounts, the infant was born healthy and crying all the signs of a normal, successful birth. But Zhang immediately told the parents that their baby had serious birth defects and wouldn't survive. She said the infant was suffering and that the kindest thing would be to let the baby go. Zhang pressured the parents to accept this, using her medical authority to make them believe they had no choice. She took the baby away from the mother, and the parents never got to hold their child. Zhang then declared the baby dead and provided an official death certificate to make it all seem real. But the baby wasn't dead at all, he was perfectly healthy. Zhang handed him over to a human trafficker and received approximately 21,600 yuan for the sale. The child was then transported to a different province to be sold to a family looking to adopt. The parents were left grief-stricken and traumatized, believing they had lost their son. This same horrific pattern was repeated with at least 6 or 7 other families. Babies were declared dead or deformed when they were actually perfectly healthy, and all were sold to trafficking rings. Zhang worked with accomplices, including other hospital staff members and adoption facilitators who helped move the babies across China. Eventually, some families became suspicious. One father in particular demanded to see his baby's body, refusing to accept Zhang's word alone. When he was denied and continued to pursue the matter, it triggered an investigation. The case was finally exposed in August 2013 when police arrested Zhang. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered the full scope of her operation. Some children were rescued and returned to their birth families. DNA testing helped reunite families who had been separated for years, leading to emotional and heartbreaking reunions. Zhang Shuxia was arrested in August 2013 and charged with human trafficking and child abduction. Her trial took place in 2014, and the evidence against her was absolutely overwhelming. Her accomplices confessed and provided detailed information about how the operation worked. DNA evidence proved conclusively that Zhang had deceived families. Babies she claimed had died were found alive and could be matched to their biological parents through genetic testing. Medical records were found to be falsified, and death certificates were proven to be fraudulent. Zhang was found guilty on all charges. She was originally sentenced to death, showing how seriously Chinese courts took her crimes. However, the death penalty came with a reprieve, and her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. Subsequently, her sentence was reduced even further, though she remains in prison serving her sentence. Her accomplices were also convicted, though some received lighter sentences than Zhang for their cooperation with investigators. Zhang's greed had destroyed countless families and caused immeasurable suffering. Her case led to significant changes in Chinese law, particularly regarding hospital oversight and adoption procedures. New regulations were implemented requiring stricter monitoring of death certificates and better supervision of maternity wards. The case highlighted the particular vulnerability of rural families in China's healthcare system, people who lack education and resources to challenge medical authority. The reaction across China was one of absolute national outrage. The baby trafficking scandal exposed a dark side of China's healthcare system that many people hadn't wanted to believe existed. Rural families throughout the country felt betrayed, wondering if they could trust hospitals and doctors at all. The case shattered trust in the medical system, particularly in rural areas where resources were already limited and oversight was minimal. The Chinese government was deeply embarrassed by the scandal and promised immediate reforms and better oversight of hospitals. Families whose babies had been stolen demanded justice, wanting to know what had happened to their children. Some babies were never found, leaving families without closure. Others were reunited after years of separation, leading to bittersweet moments where parents met children they thought they had lost forever. The case sparked a broader investigation into baby trafficking throughout China, which uncovered additional trafficking rings operating in other provinces. Zhang Shuxia's crimes reveal systemic problems in how China's healthcare system operates in rural areas and expose the vulnerability of poor families who lack the power to challenge authority figures. Today, her case remains a reminder of how positions of trust can be exploited by those without conscience. And there you have it, 3 women whose crimes were so shocking that even China's powerful censorship machine couldn't keep them hidden. Kailai, the politician's wife who poisoned a British businessman to protect her corrupt empire. Lao Rongzhi, the former schoolteacher who helped murder 7 people and evaded capture for 20 years. And Zhang Shuxia, the doctor who sold babies while telling parents their children had died. What's striking is how different these women were, one from the political elite, one a serial killer, one who exploited vulnerable families. Yet they all shared something chilling. Not one showed genuine remorse. These cases changed China in important ways, leading to better hospital oversight, more transparent investigations, and stricter adoption procedures. Here's the thing about China, the government doesn't publicize crime like Western countries do, but these cases were simply too big to hide. Today, Gu remains imprisoned, Lao was executed in 2023, and Zhang is serving her sentence. If this opened your eyes to stories you've never heard, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment, what time are you watching, where are you from, and which case shocked you most? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who seem most trustworthy.